And we had a lawsuit dropped on us. The capital raise nearly fell apart at that point. I was doing late night phone calls with my mate and going, well, this is going to be a black mark on the rest of my career, and I have to get comfortable with that and just do what I can do. The last moment, one of our investors was at their holiday house in the outback of Australia, and someone had to go on horseback to deliver them the papers. The relationship between a CEO and a board is not the same as the relationship between any other employee and their manager, even if you're an executive. When you're the CFO or chief product officer of a company, like the CEO is your boss. Like, you're quite autonomous, but they are your boss. Whereas the relationship between a CEO and a board is much more of a partnership relationship, and they don't really tell you what to do at all. And if they do, then there's probably a problem that's going to come your way very, very quickly and hard. I joined McKinsey, and when I first joined there, I think there were 12 people in the office and 3 of them were Rhodes Scholars, and so I decided I'm going to give it a crack, and that got me to Oxford. I have had many opportunities that not many Pacific people get. It's both a pleasure and a responsibility to just try and share that around. We need to tell the story of tech better, and it not just being about the technology, and I think that will help to widen the net to folks like Māori and Pacific. I remember doing a project at McKinsey, and it was probably my first time managing a project team, and we had Tuesday 8 a.m. meetings with the CFO of a multi-billion dollar company every single week that I was leading. And, the project wasn't going well. It was in Melbourne, by the way. I'd get the 6 a.m. flight on Monday morning from Melbourne, probably work until 2 a.m. Australian time that night, then we'd have the meeting the next day. Wasn't going too well, so I just started working harder. That meant I slept less and I was less effective, which meant that I messed up some more. I just ended up in this horrible spiral. What that really forced me to do was confront some of these core mental models that I had in my head. And, I'd always felt like an underdog at school, and I always had my dad in my ear going, prove them wrong, son. And the way that I had sort of materialized that in my own brain was, when you've got challenges, bring them internal, and you will find the answer within. Grit your teeth and do it. And, I think we all reach a point where, you can't do it all yourself and you have to ask for help. But it took being pushed to my limit to reevaluate that. And, that was a painful experience, and I was in my mid-20s, but it stood me in good stead for the rest of my career.
Welcome to the Startup Theatre podcast. This podcast is produced by Empire Films.
Hey everyone. It's 2026 and we're back with a brand new podcast. I'm your host, Troy Hammond. You're here with us on Startup Theatre. I hope your holidays are going really well. I hope you're really relaxed. It's probably that time of year now where you're starting to think about coming back to work and get that brain moving again. And so we've decided to hit 2026 with an absolute banger of an episode. I've known this guy, Alexander Fala, for many years now. We work together at Vend. He's a Rhodes Scholar, McKinsey graduate who's been at TradeMe and Vend and Sift and coaches lots of CEOs. He's one of the smartest minds in the country, and anyone that's met him will know that for certain. He's also one of just the loveliest guys in the country too. And so I've been trying to get Alex on the podcast for a long time, and it just so happened that 2026, our diaries have aligned, and we're now sitting in the studio waiting for Alex to come in. So I'm really keen to get into this episode. So strap in and enjoy this one. Today's guest is brought to you by Vanta. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for global frameworks like ISO 27001 and SOC 2, saving you time and money, helping you build customer trust. Over 8,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Sharesies and Flossy all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. I actually had dinner with the whole Vanta team, and I knew instantly that they would be the sponsor on the podcast. They just genuinely care about startups, and to make it go even one better, they've actually decided that my audience gets a special offer of $1,000 USD off from Vanta. All you have to do is go to vanta.com/startup theatre and enjoy your $1,000 USD off now.
I had the benefit of learning off a lot of people, a lot of really good people over my career, but by the time I got into the CEO seat, I was reasonably, self-sufficient enough that I could work things out on my own most of the time, and then just had some friends who I'd bounce stuff off. Ryan Baker was another one who I talked to a lot. We're good mates. Their first company, I was I was the guy who did the deal for Trade Me to acquire Book It. So, and we've been close ever since. So it's just, it's more like friends who I just bounce stuff off rather than kind of a so-called mentor.
Yeah. I mean, they're the best mentors, right? Is like people that can give you the truth and, you know, like come from a friend point of view. Yeah,
for sure.
What was it when you got into the CEO role for the first time though? Like, what was something that did surprise you?
The loneliness did surprise me, because the relationship between a CEO and a board is not the same as the relationship between any other employee and their manager, even if you're an executive. It's even when you are, when you're the CFO or chief product officer of a company, like the CEO is your boss. Like you're quite autonomous, but they are your boss. Whereas the relationship between a CEO and a board is much more of a partnership relationship, and they don't really tell you what to do at all. And if they do, then there's probably a problem that's going to come your way very, very quickly and hard. Yeah, that was probably the thing that surprised me most. And you never quite know whether you're going to be able to do the job until you're in the seat. But for me, I think the transition was actually quite natural. Yeah.
And because you obviously went into, like, you were at Vend when I was at Vend.
Yeah.
You started maybe after me, I think. I can't remember the exact dates.
Yep.
And then sort of, I was pretty sure that you were hired to be the CE.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, but you sort of, what did you come in initially as CFO, was it? Or
I came in as VP Strategy.
VP Strategy, that's right.
Yeah.
And then obviously grew into the CE role from Vaughan. And I think, man, that's the hardest job in the world, is to come and take over from a founder who stays in the room with you. Talk me through that.
I'm a pretty rare beast in this world, eh?
Yeah.
Like when I came into Vend, we went through that problem at the beginning. Like I came in and I was VP Strategy. 3 months later, we did a big layoff and I was CFO. And then for the next 6 months, I guess the main part of my role was being Vaughan's primary, like, right hand on business issues. Vaughan was dealing with all the things that a CEO needs to deal with, like org structure, capital, all of those kind of things. I was advising him on business issues and then he would make the decision. And I think during that period, we were probably neglecting product and tech a little bit. And then when I went into the CEO role, we kind of flipped it, where for me, all of those other things were quite natural and that was all my background. And then Vaughan was able to focus more on product and tech. And I think, we'd become close and built a high level of trust really early. And, Vaughan is also, he's a very driven guy, but he's also a humble guy. So he was really quite happy to hand over the reins. And, he went off and did a big cycle trip, mostly because he wanted to provide me space, but he didn't really need to do that. It was quite a natural transition.
Yeah. I'm in a position at the moment where I'm the founder of Talent Army, right? And I've promoted a guy that runs the business in Wellington now, and I've got Dan, my business partner in Auckland.
Yeah.
But it's hard because when I'm in the room, people always still come up to me. They'll always still walk up to me, and I'm slowly trying to push everything across to Dom. And Dom's, it's hard for him because, he sees me as a great resource as well, and says, like, you should probably get Troy's take on that.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of people probably listening to this podcast that are trying to bring in some SLT, trying to bring in a CEO, right? And so, like, how should they do that transition? How have you seen that's worked?
A new CEO who comes in, this was certainly my attitude, has to come in trying to behave like a founder. And I don't mean that they're trying to push the founder out, but they have to operate with the same level of ownership that a founder would. And, like I was really emotionally committed to Vend. Maybe it was helpful that Vaughan took some time out to give me the space, but I think I got into the role and just started making decisions. And so once you start acting that way, people just kind of assume that that's the way it's going to work, or at least that's the way it was for me. So whilst I would definitely get Vaughan's counsel on things, like I never deferred to Vaughan when he was in the room. I asked him for things that he knew about. But CEO decisions were made, there was only ever one CEO at Vend, and it was Vaughan until it was me, and then it was me.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
And was that just because of your confidence and your abilities in that role, or is it something that you just think definitively as the CEO, you have to do that going forward now?
Well, I think both. So maybe it came reasonably naturally to me because, like, I was never my attitude to my career was I always wanted to be a great member of the team, and I thought that maybe if I got a shot at doing the CEO role that, I thought I'd built up a reasonable level of capability to do it. But I was happy not to do that role as well. But once I came into the role, I was like, no, I want to give this a real shot. And so I probably acted with a certain level of confidence, but I think that's what a CEO has to do. Yeah. Like, as I said, I know there are now some somewhat creative arrangements where you've got co-CEOs and C3Os and these kind of arrangements, and that's cool if you've set it up like that. But if you set up an organization where you've got one CEO, then there can only be one CEO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your take on like one versus many?
I think having many, it's hard for me to wrap my head around. But having said that, like, I'm thinking about the businesses that do that, and, sort of Sharesies and is one example. And I think that's just the way that they've been able to make it work with founders. Yeah. Warby Parker did the same thing, I think, for a while. And look, I look at these startups and entrepreneurial businesses are by definition exceptional. And so I wouldn't default to having multiple CEOs, but I understand why it worked for those businesses.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
You talked about like being Vaughan's sort of business advisor,
yeah.
In the early days, right? And I'm keen to sort of double click on that because I've been talking to a few people. I was chatting with a CEO yesterday who sort of came into my office and was like, oh, Troy, I've got this much on, I'm doing all these things. And I said, well, who have you got around to support you? And he said, well, I've got my SLT. And I said, well, no, but do you have someone that can take some of your workload? And he was like, well, what does that look like? And I said, well, an advisor, a chief of staff, there's multiple hats that you could give them.
Yeah.
But I'm a big believer in that role. Like, I think you need to have someone by your side, you ride or die almost.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that something that you've had yourself, or is it?
Yeah, I think, the CEO role is lonely, and so having trusted confidants around you in certain, which can come in many different ways, is really important. And I think you're right that, there are some roles which are deliberately designed like that. CEO coach as well, you can get it from there. But in other cases, it's just a member of your executive team who you're tighter with. Yeah. But I've done all of that. I think when Anna first came into the exec team at Vend, she was a really critical hire for me. I wanted someone who we just kind of spoke the same language and who I knew before and who I knew already and I trusted. And so she played that role. When I was at Sift, I elevated someone out of the product team to essentially be almost like a chief of staff. I don't think we called it that role. But I wanted someone young and smart who could do some strategic thinking for me, and we could just bounce stuff off each other, and that was super valuable. Yeah, so I'm a fan.
And what is it, when you say strategic thinking, talk me through that. Like, what does that mean? Because, you've come from McKinsey and a lot of people who we both know have sort of come with that sort of strategic brain.
Yeah.
So what does that mean to a company, like, to bring that value in?
Yeah, look, strategy is probably one of the most overused words in business. Like, often people use the word strategy to just mean, we're going to think a bit more long-term and vague and not have to put numbers on things. But so what I'm talking about is probably, let's call it systems thinking, as well as genuine business strategy. So there's a skill set which comes with systems thinking, which has been able to integrate a whole lot of different types of information and synthesize that into something like simple that you can action, right? And strategy is a classic example of that, where you are trying to understand customers and product and competitors, and you might be looking at unit economics, things coming from all over the place in different forms, actually the qualities of your team and capabilities. And then you have to somehow bring that together and say, well, what are we going to do with all this? And you have to simplify it. So when I talk about strategy and put it into a startup context, the first thing to say is there's a massive kind of line between before product market fit and after product market fit. So before product market fit, like, forget about strategy, just find a customer. Mm-hmm. That's really all that matters.
Have a goal.
Yeah. But, after you've got product market fit, what tends to happen is markets they develop and they get a bit more competitive, and, there's more customers looking to buy something. And so then you need to create more clarity around where you're going to play and how you're going to win. That doesn't just mean things that you're going to be good at, but you have to say to yourself, what is a real advantage that we have in the market, which is going to mean that we are relevant to customers and beat all of our competitors. And I think that's the thing which often as companies make that transition from being a startup pre-product market fit to having to think about scale, they need to make a leap there and really think about what's going to be distinctive about their company that they can sustain over the long term.
What comes to my mind there is Vend's example of like where Vend stopped being a partner to everyone and started being a payments, provider for themselves almost, like well, not a payments provider, but doing it themselves versus trying to be a partner to everyone. Did that come from sort of strategy? Yeah,
I mean, Vend was a great example. So when I came into Vend, there wasn't really much strategy. I mean, that company had started out as a real rocket ship where they'd done some great work, found product market fit early as a point of sale software provider, and the go-to-market model worked really, really quickly as well, where it was sort of, do some SEO and some pay-per-click marketing, get customers to the website, they take a trial and you convert.
Smash a cash register.
Yeah, all of that stuff. And, they were working with retailers across all different verticals, so everything from kind of apparel to cafes and restaurants to kind of stadiums, I think, were in there. So it was a massive range of stuff. They were trying to do a lot of different products. Like at that point, we'd bought our own e-commerce software platform. We had product managers and engineers were kind of doing whatever they wanted to a certain degree. There was a lot of freedom. And, I looked at that and went, okay, this market's starting to get a whole lot more competitive and we need clarity over what we are actually going to focus on and where we're going to put our resources. And so we made a few decisions. We immediately made the decision to focus on retail over hospitality. We saw that the unit economics were better there and our product was just more suited to that market. But we also made some decisions about the scope of our product and decided that we were going to be quite partner-led rather than trying to build everything ourselves. And, that was a function of looking at the resources we had available and just going, retail tech is such a massive space that we can't build it all ourselves. And then we looked at our product and said, well, one of the advantages that we've got is that we've actually got great architecture and we've almost built API first. And so we have an advantage in building those partnerships over many of our competitors. So that was kind of the part of the early part of the strategy from a product perspective. And then over time, that also evolved because we needed to get beyond that original go-to-market model. And part of that was, doing channel partnerships. And to do that, you had to integrate with other products. So, there was quite a lot to go behind it. But you can probably tell, again, that there was a lot of complex information, which then kind of came down to quite simple guidance on how we were going to run the business.
Yeah, awesome. When I spoke to a few people about you coming on the podcast, one question that came up was, pricing. Can you ask him about pricing? And I was like, well, I don't know who's the master of pricing, but you told me about, I remember you and I had a conversation on the phone ages ago, and you mentioned like a pizza or something.
Oh, the Big Mac thing.
Yeah, the Big Mac, yeah.
Oh, look, so I have to give credit to, I think it's Simon Kutcher, who are the big pricing consultants, but they used that analogy and it was super valuable to me. So yeah, when you're thinking about pricing your product, I really like the analogy of McDonald's, right? And part of what you're trying to work out is what is the Big Mac, what is in the combo, and what are the things that get sold on their own. So what I mean by that is when you think about the Big Mac, everybody wants it and they get a whole lot of value out of it. So that becomes kind of the central core product. And then you look at the combo and what goes into the combo. So what are the fries and the drink? And that tends to be things which are everybody wants them, but maybe they don't put a whole lot of distinctive value in them. So you put them into a bundle so that you can kind of incrementally get more value out of it. But then you have things like the apple pie or the coffee. And the situation with them is some people value those really highly, but other people don't want them at all. And so then you can have them as separate add-ons and get quite a lot of money out of a few people. But if you put it into the combo, then the mass market would think that they're paying for things that they don't really value. So then they sort of have a lower perception of price. So that's sort of the McDonald's analogy of thinking about bundling and unbundling.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really like that analogy. Hey, I've heard you say, or you mentioned online that you like a battle-tested, CEO, right? And I kind of love that. That's when I think about your career, you've definitely had some moments where you've gone in and had to fight some battles.
Yeah.
Like, if you were to sort of go back now and think, oh my God, these were the toughest battles that I had to face.
Yeah.
What comes to mind?
Yeah, it's probably one from Vend and one from Sift, right? So, and the first thing to say is that all of us in startup world are in high stakes situations, right? Until you are a stable, profitable company, there is always a chance of death. And that's one of the things that's different about what we do. But if I think about Vend, a lot of people know about 2015 when we were in trouble and had to do a layoff. But it would have been, 2017, things were starting to work a bit better. But we decided that we needed to raise some capital to shore things up and also just enable us to continue with our growth. And it would have been, I think, June 2018 where we decided, 2017, where we decided that we were going to raise some money. We went out to our investors, pretty quickly got soft commits, and everything was looking great. Mm-hmm. And then literally, I think the week after the board meeting where we decided to move forward, we had a lawsuit dropped on us across multiple jurisdictions around the world, including the US. And that's a big deal for when you're doing a capital raise and effectively put everything on hold. So suddenly I'm sort of trying to keep investors on the hook to make sure we can do this raise at the same time as I'm negotiating a settlement on this global lawsuit.
Can you talk about the lawsuit or?
I can't talk about it in too much detail, apart from to say that we knew that, there's sort of three categories of lawsuit, right? There's one is just frivolous stuff and you sort of ignore that. The other end of the spectrum is like existential, this thing is going to kill our business. And then there's the ones in the middle, which is what this one was, which it was a real thing and it was going to massively damage our business if we lost. It wasn't going to kill it. So it was a space where, we were kind of negotiating at the same time as negotiating the other one. And it took a few months and we were able to settle that. But of course, meantime, cash had continued to burn, which puts us in a weaker position on both of those things. And so then we went back to investors. We had to give them a heads up that things were extended because of this lawsuit that we were dealing with. And then we went back to them and said, okay, it's all resolved. And, luckily we were able to pull it back together. But we closed that, remember it started in June, and we closed that capital raise on December the 21st. And even at the last moment, one of our investors, I think, was at their holiday house in kind of the outback of Australia, and someone had to go on horseback to deliver them the papers or something crazy. But, there was I think it was the last business day of the year, and we all know that if you get into the Christmas holidays, all bets are off. Yeah. So that was a huge moment where there was a lot happening behind the scenes. And, we often talk about pressure moments, but pressure is harder when it's extended over months. And that was just relentless for 6 months. So that was an example.
You mentioned one at Sift as well?
Yeah. So Sift is a, deep tech hardware company. Mm-hmm. And we were selling hardware at about $500,000 a unit. We were selling into primarily the semiconductor industry. And when I joined there, one of the big risks in that business was that we had huge revenue concentration. About half of our revenue was coming from one customer or one or two in any given year. And so we knew that, part of the game was essentially to create a more sustainable business before we had a bit of a whoopsie with one customer, which kind of, which hit our revenue. And I joined in the middle of COVID when there was a big semiconductor industry boom, but unfortunately there was a bust that followed the boom. With that one big customer essentially reduced their purchases by 90% in 1 year, and so it cut our revenue in half. And that is existential for that business. And one of the things about hardware businesses, 90% of our revenue came from just selling units every year. It's not like SaaS where you've got recurring revenue, Mm-hmm. SaaS is almost like, it's like swimming in a swimming pool. You can always swim to the side of the pool and just kind of cut costs and get to a sustainable business. But when you're selling hardware units, you're in the deep blue ocean. Mm-hmm. That put that business under a lot of pressure. And we couldn't just cut cost. We were thinking about cutting costs. So, at that point, you really think about the impact on people.
Mm. Talk me about that moment. So, get yourself back in that headspace that you've just been given the notice that 90% of your revenue's gone.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Yeah, well, the first thing is you don't get notice. What you get is just delays on purchase orders, right? And so that's part of the mental challenge is you're going, okay, so I think this is coming. It's always come before. The signals are all great, but if it doesn't, we're in big trouble. Then it becomes a puzzle. It's how do we work our way through this? And as I said, a big part of that is, so you're thinking about your people. So because you have to think about the cost base. You're thinking about what you can do with investors. And when you're talking with investors, that's not only about do they have money to give me, it's about what story am I going to tell them? And okay, so maybe I cut costs and that puts me in a stronger financial position. But it also makes a weaker story because they're worried about what they're buying into at that point of time. So it really is kind of threading the needle, trying to work all the way through. So, if I think about the Sift example, we decided that, yes, we needed to cut costs a bit. And so we had to deal with all of the, the human impact of that. Like no CEO takes that lightly, or certainly I don't. But we also knew that if we cut too much costs, then we were never going to be able to sell and we wouldn't have much to offer to our investors. And so to some degree, we had to run the gauntlet and just say, okay, we are, the mindset from my side was, and it was all transparent, but my mindset was, well, if we cut costs right the way back here, then we're going to have, a shit business. And also we'll have kind of a shit market position because we won't have innovated our product. And so my view was, okay, well, we're actually going to trim a little bit, but we're going to continue to invest so that investors can look at our business and say there's something which this thing can do going forward.
How do you have the confidence to do that?
I'm not sure it's confidence. It's just, it's logic, and I'm quite a feeling person when it comes to the human impact of business decisions. But, to some degree, I'm a bit of a slave to the answer, and you just have to work through those things and go, okay, well, this is what it is. And of course, consulting with particularly the board and investors along the way, I don't really think about the courage. It's just what's the right decision, and then go ahead and do it. But then, with Sift, we went through that process. And again, we ended up managing to raise capital and continue kind of building the sustainable business. But, at a personal level, like I was doing late night phone calls with my mate, with one mate in particular, and going, well, this is kind of going to be a black mark on the rest of my career, and I have to get comfortable with that and just do what I can do.
Yeah. That's hard, right? Because you go from real highs and then real lows, and adrenaline the whole time, right?
Yep.
And in a lonely role, right?
Yeah.
How do you look after yourself, mate?
I think, I'm sort of grounded primarily by family. I was really blessed. I met my wife when we were both at high school, and
in Wellington.
Yeah, high school in Wellington. And, we got 3 kids and that's really what keeps me grounded. I think ever since when the kids were very young, I got used to the idea that when I got home, they didn't really give a crap about how my day at work was. They cared about how dad was with them. And so that's always been what grounds me. A little bit of faith as well. I think we've been, even as a family, we've had some really great rituals. Like we're Catholic, and so we every night we say family prayers. But if you take the religion out of it, what that means is that every single night we have a moment as a family of both connection and gratitude. And even when I was traveling with work, I'd call in for family prayers at 9 o'clock New Zealand time, even if that meant stepping out of dinner or making sure I had a gap in meetings or whatever it was.
That's lovely, man. That's lovely. And I think with the evolving landscape of religion, over the years, that's the thing that I think the world's missing the most is just the core values and just the rituals of coming back together as a family. And
No, as I said, it's super value for us, and I'm certainly not gonna try and evangelize anyone today, but I think finding ways to have that moment of gratitude and connection is super important. And it's super important for an executive team as well, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did a guy from Wellington like end up at McKinsey and end up in CEO roles, mate? Talk me through like did you map out how you wanted your career to go?
Ish. I mean, I had an idea, but I think there was just a series of decisions that compounded on each other. I probably first thought about a business career when, I was a kid in the 80s and there was this movie Wall Street. Mm-hmm. It was about a working class kid who'd gone onto Wall Street and made something of his life. And I was inspired by that. There was a whole lot of ethical issues which were explained in the movie, but what I saw in that was I saw my father in it. My dad was the youngest of 11 kids coming from a small village in Samoa. And then he came to New Zealand and he became a salesman and, he was selling insurance a lot of the time while I was a kid. And he was great at it. I remember seeing all the league tables for, the nationwide league tables. And, the top 10 would be a lot of, European sounding names from expensive suburbs in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. And then there was Yole Fala from Masterton. And so that was a real inspiration for me. And I saw that I could bring that same sort of energy to having a big impact and making big moves in business. And, kind of Wall Street was the thing that connected the dots for me. When I finished school, I decided I wanted to study finance with a view that I might become an investment banker. And then, as I said, there was just a series of things which worked for me. Like, I'd been at school in Wellington. I decided to move to Auckland because I wanted to be at the commercial centre of the country. I didn't get invited into the honours program after my second year at university. But instead of just sitting there and accepting it, I went and talked to the honours coordinator and kind of nagged him for a year. And then after my third year, I got in. In my honours year, I did a lot of work at university, but I probably spent more time in the first half of the year tailoring my applications to every single job opportunity and ensuring that every cover letter spoke to the exact things that employer thought about. And that meant that, I think I ended up with like 6 or 7 job offers and that was at a pretty weak time. And then I joined McKinsey and when I first joined there, I think there were 12 people in the office and 3 of them were Rhodes Scholars. And so I decided I'm going to give it a crack and that got me to Oxford. It was definitely a tough journey, and I got a lot of things wrong, but I think the one thing that I've been quite consistently good at is making the right decision rather than the easy one.
So talk me through that then, like how, if you've got decisions in front of you, what's your process for making a decision?
It's not really a process. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot of reflection, and then I start scribbling notes, and then I talk to people who I respect, and then ultimately I make a call. Mm-hmm. When I decided to move to Auckland, I was probably drifting at that point into going to Victoria University in Wellington, and then one day my dad said to me, "Hey son, I thought you were thinking about moving to Auckland." And then we basically had a night where we yelled at each other and I cried a little bit. And by the end of it, I was 90% sure. Yeah. So I think these things have to be, they need to be quite intuitive, but I guess I was lucky that I was just brought up to make that hard decision. And I actually think that in many cases, the decision making is not knowing what the right decision is not the hard bit. It's that people get scared.
Yeah.
And I just kind of got taught to bypass that moment of fear and just do it.
Yeah, I talk about this all the time, like comfort zones. People just too scared to get out of their comfort zones and be comfortable in the uncomfortable to be able to like get to that next stage. I wish more people would just be like embrace uncertainty and go for it, right?
Yeah, and look, it is hard. As I said, I'm very privileged now because I'm married to someone who I've known for 30 years. And so she's also the voice in my ear now.
Yeah.
It's great.
Awesome. And so look, we've seen like you and I know a lot of people from McKinsey, right, that have had they've in their ecosystem here now. What is it that you learn that's so powerful that has enabled some of these people to be some of the best leaders in the country now?
Yeah, I think the big one is that you learn structured problem solving and communication. Yeah. So you get taught how to take a big hairy problem and break it down into its constituent parts and then just solve them. And then you also get taught to say, okay, well, now I've got all this information. How do I synthesize it up into a really compelling communication? And the communication is actually part of the problem solving. like I firmly believe that writing clarifies thinking, for example, and maybe we can talk about that a bit more. But yeah, I think that's what McKinsey teaches you. It also teaches you a lot about work ethic and resilience. I remember being a 21-year-old at McKinsey, and we had a progress review on the Monday. I worked until 1 a.m. on Friday night. I was back in the office at 8 a.m. on Saturday morning. I did an all-nighter and worked until 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, had a few hours sleep, and then I was back till 9 p.m. that night, and then I was in the meeting at 9 a.m. on Monday morning. Like probably that, some of our younger generation aren't really used to putting in that kind of effort to get where they want to get. But resilience too, like I remember doing a project at McKinsey, and it was probably my first time managing a project team. And, we had Tuesday 8 a.m. meetings with the CFO of a multi-billion-dollar company every single week that I was leading. And, the project wasn't going well. It was in Melbourne, by the way. So I would fly over it. I'd get the 6 a.m. flight on Monday morning from Melbourne. I'd probably work until 2 a.m. Australian time that night. Then we'd have the meeting the next day. Wasn't going too well. So I just started working harder. That meant I slept less and I was less effective, which meant that I messed up some more. And so I just ended up in this horrible spiral. What that really forced me to do was confront some of these core mental models that I had in my head. And, I'd always felt like an underdog at school, and I always had my dad in my ear going, "Prove them wrong, son." And the way that I had sort of materialized that in my own brain was, when you've got challenges, bring them internal and you will find the answer within. Grit your teeth and do it. And, I think we all reach a point where, you can't do it all yourself and you have to ask for help. But it took being pushed to my limit to reevaluate that. And, that was a painful experience, and I was in my mid-20s, but it stood me in good stead for the rest of my career.
Is that largely because you feel you've got multiple pressures, right? Like you've got obviously this insatiable desire to be great. You've got your father, your family. You must have some like cultural pressures as well, right? Of feeling like you are lifting, your family, right?
Yeah.
And so did that come into play?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I was given gifts and privileges, and it's my responsibility to try and make the most out of those. And I think through life we all build pictures in our head of what that looks like, what success might look like. And so, yeah, for sure, I wanted to live up to that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. What does success look like for you now?
I think I've come to a view now that it's a bit of an illusion. It's really not a destination, and what matters to me in life is doing things which I care about, with good people, making a real contribution myself to that, never being a passenger, living according to family values. That's the stuff which kind of gives me meaning and purpose in life. And I think it's something which, startup founders need to think about a lot. I know a lot of exited founders, as you do. And, these are people who have essentially now achieved the dream, right? They've had a big payout. They don't have to work for the rest of their life. And I think if you spoke to 10 of them, you'd find 9 of them who have an existential crisis in the first year or two after they have that exit, because it was never about the destination. It was all about striving and finding some sort of purpose. So now, I kind of think success is something which other people define about whether you're successful or not. And I try and avoid thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What motivates you now then?
2 things. Feeling what gives me meaning every day, and thinking about how I can have the most positive impact on New Zealand.
All right. And that's really interesting, right? Because obviously off the back of the Rod podcast, right, we talked a lot about New Zealand.
Yeah.
And Rod said, hey, look, New Zealand's lost its way. And it needs to start innovating, start trying again, start building things. And so I'd be curious to sort of ask you that same question. Has New Zealand lost its way first? And if you agree, what can we be doing?
Yes, would be my view. I think that New Zealand has drifted over time into incrementalism, and that's not a recent thing. It's a long-term thing, right? Like if you go right back, we had these, probably many listeners won't remember this, but during the 80s and 90s, we had this massive turmoil, this complete change in the country around our economic and political system. And then we brought in this system of government called MMP, which is essentially designed to be incremental and more steady. And that's, to me, characterised a lot of what New Zealand's been like over the last 20 to 30 years. And I say that whilst at the same time there has been this kind of small niche of people who have been super ambitious and bold, and it's actually really exciting what we've all seen emerge in the tech sector and the entrepreneurial sector over the last little while. But yeah, we need to see more of that.
Even the tech sector to a degree. Like, I've been here now 18 years myself, and I would say 10, 12 years ago, like, everyone was like had big aspirations, and then I felt like it fell off for a wee while. That may just be economic conditions and people wanting to take a little bit more of a secure career instead of trying to innovate. But definitely feels like it's changing. We're talking in the left on the way up. I'm a bit of a canary in the coal mine at times with the recruitment company, and business confidence is definitely feeling really strong at the moment. The busiest we've been in a long time. How are you sort of seeing it from the ecosystem from yourself?
I mean, part of this is to understand that by definition, entrepreneurship is exceptional. So it's really hard to generalize, actually. And I think if you look at the history of the New Zealand tech sector, we've essentially had these lines of whakapapa, like these kind of core companies, which have then led to a whole lot of others. And you look at, like, I think TradeMe was a place that I was really privileged to work at. And, there was definitely a connection from TradeMe to Xero, and Timely kind of had a TradeMe connection. Even Vend, Vaughan worked with a partner to TradeMe, and so that's kind of the way New Zealand has evolved. And I actually think it's really exciting what we're seeing right now. Like, I mean, probably the most exciting lines of genealogy in the New Zealand sector right now is all the Rocket Lab alums. Like, Rocket Lab's hugely ambitious. There's no fundamental reason why that company should have been started in New Zealand, but we had a great entrepreneur, and then there's others that have spawned out of that, and I think that's super exciting.
Yeah, I definitely see like the ecosystem now that Rocket Lab has built with some of the founders that have come out of that business are remarkable.
Yeah, it's great. Halter, Partly, Vesiv, they're all ex-Rocket Lab. There was a whole lot of kind of let's say godchildren of LanzaTech, if you want to get into more of that deep tech space. It's very cool. Yeah.
What do you think it is about those companies that breed those type of people? Like, how are they able to sort of send people out into the world with that confidence, ambition, and credibility?
That's a very good question. And it's hard to put my finger on it. But I think the answer to it is probably something around talent density, and that those companies required really dense talent to be successful, and then those people went off and did things. Like, there's some companies that are able to just catch lightning in a bottle, and they end up on the right trajectory. And to a certain extent there, you end up, what Warren Buffett likes. Like, you can have monkeys run it, and it's never quite that simple. But my view is certainly that talent density is one of the most important things to achieve when you're building a company. And the great thing about that is it means that you then end up with lots of people going out and doing things afterwards, and so I think that's what you saw at TradeMe, what you saw at Rocket Lab. It's actually one of the things I'm most proud of about Vend as well, and I think the executive team that we pulled together was amazing, and not just the executive team. And, after I finished at Vend, Anna became the CEO, and then she was Chief Strategy Officer at Lightspeed. Shivani's running people and culture for Lightspeed now. Andrew Fraser's the president at Halter. There's Vend people scattered throughout senior roles at companies like Halter and Tracksuit. I think that's awesome, and that's because we, and certainly for me personally, it was a real priority to get the absolute best people that we could.
Yeah, awesome. I've spoken to a few founders out of Rocket Lab recently, and there's the common thread, which is something that you mentioned before, seems to be we were young guys working insane hours, working our asses off with a core mission that we believed in, and so we were able to do impossible things because they felt possible to us.
Yeah.
And I think that's something like you can't bottle. Like, if you could bottle that and share it around with everyone, everyone would be successful. But
I think that's right, and that's probably true at Rocket Lab, although you got to be careful about kind of generalizing around things like young dudes. But I think the thing that you can generalize is having companies with immensely high standards, and with great levels of urgency. And I actually think that's one of the challenges for New Zealand as a country in building these companies, because we are a small country, and that means relationships matter, and that means often that we are too nice, can turn into passive aggressive. Certainly my experience is massive generalization. Many New Zealand companies' cultures are too soft, and we really, Frank Slootman's words, we need to amp it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do we do that?
Well, I think a lot of that comes down to leadership. It's a real cultural sense, right? Like, the way that those things manifest is that, in every meeting, someone asks that awkward question that you're expected to deliver quality work all the time. It's that you ask yourself, why are we delivering this next week when we could deliver it tomorrow? And I think that comes from the way that the leader shows up, first of all, and that starts with the founder and or CEO. And then it's about the sort of people that you bring into the organization. Yeah.
So you're coaching CEOs and other people now, right? Like, what things are you seeing? Like patterns are you tracking that a lot of people are doing poorly or need help on? What are the things that you think, or they're the ones that make successful CEOs?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing when I go in to sort of advise someone is the problem that they want to talk about is often not the real problem. So part of it is actually being able to hold up a mirror and have honest conversations, And
is that because they don't see it, or they don't want to see it?
A bit of both. It's often psychologically difficult to admit things, but it's also that, of course, founders often come out of, founders are often not super experienced in business. They come from finding a problem that they obsess over, and then suddenly they have this company around them that they have to run. So they don't necessarily know. But, classic things that you see are, someone says that they've got a problem raising capital, but the reality is their unit economics suck, and so you've actually got to confront the core of the way that you get customers on board. Or they say that, we really want to scale sales, and then you can see that the product's broken and customers don't love it. And those are difficult conversations to have, but I think really important ones. And we were talking a bit earlier about having really good, honest people around you, and so I think it's great if you can have those people internal to the team who are truth tellers. But yeah, I mean, the sort of things that then you would see are, and I've mentioned a few of them already, I think culture is often a bit soft and just needs amping up.
Yeah.
I think, the founders being new and not necessarily having experience, often the talent density issue is where that plays out, because if you're a technical founder, for example, like how do you know what a good chief financial officer looks like? Like you're not going to be able to work that one out from first principles, and so often what leaders need to do is either preferably actually just go out and meet a whole lot of people, even if they're not hiring or, there's someone that they'll never be able to hire, like just go and have chats with people and then you start to realize what great looks like. Yeah. But you can get that a little bit from external advice as well. And probably the third thing that I see is lack of clarity on strategy, and as I said, I'm often working with companies who have kind of just got past finding product market fit. And then the bar on what it takes to succeed in the market just keeps getting higher and higher. As I said, it's no longer, we've solved a problem and we've found an early adopter, like super hard going through that early part of a company. But at that level, it's just a different standard to, okay, well, now a whole lot of people can solve that problem and the incumbents have woken up. So we have to do something distinctive, and that means we have to have real clarity around how we're going to win.
And do you think there's a time that the founder has to be moving away or stepping aside to let someone else come in? Or do you think, obviously depending on the person, but like when for you would be the time, all right, we need to start thinking about bringing in a CEO that can help us get to the next stage?
Yeah, I think that's so personal. I mean, again, you draw out and you take a 20-year lens on the industry. And it used to be that as soon as a VC came in that they would replace the founder. And then I think the venture capital industry worked out that number one, that was often the wrong decision. And number two, it didn't make founders love them so much. And so then founder friendly became this big thing. But I think then the pendulum really swung to the opposite extreme. And now it's a very individual decision. And a big part of it's about actually what the founder's interests are. I know that for Vaughan, he got to a point where, what he loved was product and tech and innovation, and then he spent all this time talking about go-to-market and capital and, org structures. And sometimes founder CEOs can reach their limit, but I think the important part about that is that there's conversations happening early and coaching them. So, I think everyone loves the idea of a founder going the distance, and I certainly do, but it's not always the right thing for them or the organization. And so you just try and make it as smooth and painless and make sure everyone's on the same page as much as possible.
What do you think the top traits are that you need to be like a successful CEO? What are the things that the core skill sets and attributes you need?
Tough question, because the reality is CEO's probably got the loosest job description in the building, and everyone does it
just
slightly
jazz hands,
differently.
right, at the top.
Yeah. I always joke to people, as CEO, you kind of do everything and nothing. But look, I think you, at a personal level, you definitely need to have resilience. I think in terms of the skill set, you do need to find the way to give people clarity. And that can come in certain ways. My version of that was, I think, strategic thinking and clear communication. And then you also need to find a way to get people excited about the job that they're doing and kind of, intrinsically motivated. And again, that comes from many different things. So I think some people do that through their product vision. Some people do that through their relentlessness. Some people do that because they are just people who are loved. Other people do it because they're seen as competent, and so people trust them and feel safe with them. So there's heaps of different ways to do it. But, ultimately, you have to be able to articulate a vision and get people in behind it. And I think there's a few different paths to get there.
Do you I often get asked by CEOs that I'm working with recruiting that are like early stage growing. They're like, oh, I don't know enough about marketing, or I don't know enough about revenue, or I don't know enough about this, and they're conscious that they're getting asked questions that they don't know the answers to.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to someone if they approached you and said, I feel like I don't know the depth, I can't get to the depth that people want me to?
A few things. Probably learn those things. At some point, you have to.
How deep should you be able to go into every domain in the business and know, a lot?
Not necessarily. I mean, the second thing, I probably got these in the wrong order, right? Because the other one is don't be afraid to say I don't know sometimes. Yeah. I think that actually gives you credibility. Certainly trying to muddle your way through things if you don't know is a way to destroy trust. But there's only so many times that you can say I don't know before people will question whether you know anything. But I think the third thing is, of course, lean on the team, and whilst people want to see a strong CEO, like it's actually really great for people to see that there are many strong leaders around an organization, and the CEO doesn't think it has to be all about them. So, I remember at SIFT, for example, one of the things we changed was the monthly all hands became a little bit the Alex show, and that wasn't healthy for many reasons. And so we just got someone else to chair that and many different people to present over time. And I think that was helpful for me because I certainly didn't have the technical knowledge to answer everyone's questions.
Yeah.
But it was also good for those leaders to have that experience and good for the team.
Would you do hardware again?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glutton for punishment?
Yeah, a little bit. Look, hardware it's hard. I'm always looking for businesses that, I've talked about it, have got sustainable advantages. And, the hard thing about software, like it's easy to get an MVP up, but that means it's easy for 1 million people around the world to get an MVP up as well. And so it can become super competitive. And even once you've got a product up and running, it can become relatively easy to copy. And all this has got easier with AI. Whereas hardware and other real world businesses, you may not be able to build it into $1 trillion business, but you can kind of build $100 million or $1 billion businesses that have got real moats. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, I want to talk about like preparing a business for acquisition because it's something that especially when a CEO comes in, a lot of the time their job is to take over from the founder because, hey, we're looking to be acquired in two to 5 years. I mean, how many times have I tried to headhunt you over the last few years and say, this company is about to try and get acquired now. They need someone to come in.
Yeah.
What is it that you're thinking and doing when you're going into a role like that? And how are you preparing a company for being acquired?
number one is with every business, whether it's acquisition or capital raising or any other kind of outcome, start with the fundamentals. So it is about product market strategy and getting your go-to-market models right, and all of those, getting the right team. So everything starts with the fundamentals. And it's often said that businesses are bought, not sold. I don't think that's entirely true, but there's definitely a real grain of truth in there. So make your business as good as possible.
Is there like one metric that you particularly have a passion for?
I think that's like asking a pilot if there's one instrument they look at. No, it's always a bit more well-rounded than that. But the other side of it is you're always thinking about the context of that, the environment that the company operates in. So if you're building something up for sale, the obvious question is who's the buyer?
Yeah.
So for there to be a buyer, you might think about a private equity buyer, might be a strategic buyer, but then you should be able to map out who the other people in the ecosystem are. Are they acquisitive? What sort of acquisitions do they do? And you can pretty quickly work out where the channels are. I think that bit's actually relatively easy. It's probably where investment bankers make their money, but you can do a lot of that thinking yourself.
Yeah. And do you I often get asked this, when we're starting to think about, all right, the founders are feeling like the future could be an acquisition for them. How do they start these conversations with these potential, acquirers, or is it through third parties, or do you start strategic relationships or?
Well, I think it's often true that, these things change a little bit over time, but almost by definition, strategic buyers are probably going to pay more for your business than a financial buyer, because financial buyers just look at your business and value it as it is. A strategic buyer says, well, we've got a 1 + 1 = 3 situation here, right? And so then you can fight over who gets the extra one in the middle. And a strategic buyer is almost certainly going to be a partner of yours in some sense. And so I think building up, it's either a partner or a competitor, right? Yeah. And so I do think building up relationships in the ecosystem is a good thing to open up opportunities to acquire. You never want to be out there going, oh, my business is for sale. Like if you're in that situation, you're clearly in a disadvantaged position.
Fire sale.
Yeah. So building relationships early and I think is valuable.
Yeah. And do you have relationships with investment bankers early in that process, or are you bringing them in as needed at the end, or?
A little bit. I mean, I found that when I was at Vend, we obviously had a decent amount of VC investment, and that put us on the radar of a bunch of investment banks who wanted to be in the running for if we ever sold the company, and also put us on the radar of a lot of investors. And everyone does this quite differently, but I found it valuable to maintain relationships with all of them. Not only because I thought at some point they might want to give us some money, but also because I looked at it as free consulting. These people are seeing a wide spectrum of businesses all the time. Like if I had a VC or a private equity firm who wanted to talk to me, I had my list of questions for, what are the benchmarks you're seeing around these particular metrics? Hey, you've invested in this company, interested in what you saw from it from the outside. What are the big trends that you see coming that concern you? What made you reach out? Like I was using them as consulting.
Interesting. Would you ever go on that side of the fence, mate?
Never say never. I like some things about it, but I much prefer being inside. I'm a builder by nature, and not, maybe not a builder of products so much, but definitely a builder of teams and organizations. That stuff really excites me.
Hey, you're a proud Samoan guy, man, and I love that about you. And as I said, I've been love watching you back in Samoa recently to, seeing your family's sort of heritage. And that's something that you've infused through your business and the boards that you sit on and the likes.
Yeah.
How important is that for you to be able to give that back and do something like that?
Yeah, I mean, my Samoan heritage is massively important to me. It's a core part of my identity. It's been a long journey, when you come from mixed heritage, working that kind of stuff out. And I think, the way I think about that is it's just been such a rich part of my life. And as I said, I have had many opportunities that not many Pacific people get. And so it's both a pleasure and a responsibility to just try and share that around, and I don't really know what to say. It's so deep. I kind of can't really talk about it without giving you an hour-long spiel about my culture and my heritage.
How do we get more Pacifica and Māori into tech? Like that's something that I'm pretty passionate about, right? Is like how do we educate through heroes and through people or through whatever it may be to show a pathway into technology?
Like if you want to get people into the technical space, engineering, then, the focus for that really needs to start early. It's about education. I mean, unfortunately, the Māori and Pacific results at any stage of education are not great, right? A big part of the near-term solution is actually sharing more broadly what this tech world is. I'm sort of an accidental tech executive. I didn't come from a technical background. But what I have found in the industry, which I think we do a pretty bad job of telling people about, is just, technology and building these companies, it's a real creative endeavor. It's a massive creative outlet for me, and there's a huge space for people with design chops and things like that. It's also a real competitive endeavor. Like part of the reason I do what I do is because I used to play competitive sports and I loved it, and kind of doing this business thing is what gives me that juice, And then there's also a real place for care in business. Like I've seen Pacific people come up in tech companies through the customer support realm, and it turns out that they're just amazing people leaders because many of them grow up through, running youth groups at church and being involved in sports and community groups. And so there's real skill there. So I think at a general sense, we need to tell the story of tech better and it not just being about the technology.
Yeah.
And I think that will help to widen the net to folks like Māori and Pacific.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I say tech, I mean the tech industry per se, not the particular engineering roles, because there's so many entry points into technology companies.
Yeah, there are. But I think from outside the tech industry, what they see is us talking about technology all the time.
Yeah, no, indeed. Hey, I want to ask you a question. Like, I have recently tried a few things in Talanami and other businesses. They haven't worked, but I was gung-ho that they were going to work.
Yeah.
And I had to have a few people around me to have some hard conversations with me to say, hey, these aren't going to work. Or you're taking on too much, Troy. And so I really had to change my mind on a few things. And I think it's something that, is an important thing to do, is to reflect and to acknowledge that you've made some decisions that are, poor or just wrong timing, whatever it may be.
Yep.
And so I'd be curious to get your input on that. Like, talk to me about, like, when was the time that you really had to change your mind?
Like an experience at Vend comes to mind, actually. So I remember Ben Gracewood, who was running engineering. He was under a bit of pressure because we all felt like we weren't just releasing enough new stuff quickly enough. And Ben came back to me and sort of said, well, I just want more resource. Didn't quite say it that simply, but that was the gist of the message. And I was so skeptical because I think many of us have seen this before when you go, well, put more resource into a product team and nothing more comes out. But Ben actually did a lot of good thinking about it. And he sort of came back to me and said, he'd done a bunch of analysis and worked out right now 70% of our product time is spent on maintenance on the existing product. Mm-hmm. So only 30% of our time is on new features. If you let me increase the team by 30%, I'll double the output of new features. I was so skeptical, but to be honest, he'd done the work and, he'd built up a whole lot of trust. And so when I looked him in the eye, I was like, you're going to deliver this double the product velocity, right? And he was like, yep, I am. And that was enough to change me, So I'm a bit of a sucker for a good story and just having trust in someone. So look, I think everyone who's worked with me would say that I'm super opinionated and, I grew up, the family dinner table was one where there were a lot of debate/arguments that happened and it was sort of, so that's the environment that I like. But if someone's really thought something through, then yeah, absolutely. I'll go with what you think then.
Hey, earlier, Alex, you said writing clarifies thinking. Can you define that?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I learned when I was at McKinsey, actually. So, the way things worked was you would go into a new project and you would start the project and literally on day one and certainly week one, you would write your hypothesis for what the answer was for the project. And you'd just write this clear logic for what you thought the answer was. And the benefit of that was it then gave you some things to check and disprove, and it just really helped to focus the thinking. So I learned that skill there, and it was something which, it it was a big thing at Sift, actually. So Sift is, deep tech hardware, highly technical product, which means super complicated. We had teams around the globe. And, one of the big teams was in Korea, where most of the team there spoke English as a second language. But for some reason, most of our communication was verbal. Mm. And so that just left so much room for misunderstanding, conflict between teams because we hadn't really clarified what we thought, wasted time relitigating decisions. It was just really damaging to the business. And so I really pushed the team. Okay, we're going to go to a mode now where we write the 2-page memo when we're making any kind of complicated decision. And I think that had a transformational impact on the way that we operated as a business. And so, look, as I said, writing clarifies thinking. So forcing people to write things down just really helps to sharpen things up. I think generally PowerPoint sucks. Like, it's good for making a presentation fun and emotionally compelling, but it leaves so many gaps for poor logic. My model was to do the 2-page dot dash memo. And many people would have heard of the Amazon 6-page memo, where they have a similar theory around PowerPoint and writing helps you clarify thinking. But writing 6 pages at quality is going to take you a lot of time, and I didn't want people spending all of that time. So instead, it was kind of the 2-page memo was A plus B equals C. Underneath A, you've kind of got 1, 2, 3, which add up to A, and it just really clarified the logic. And I just essentially demanded that people use that for key decisions, and it meant that we could really, make decisions with confidence and then move forward. Super valuable.
So rapid fire, just give me the first thing that sort of comes to mind as soon as I ask you the question. In one sentence, what drives you now?
As I said, it's feeling what gives me meaning each day and then thinking about how I can have the biggest impact on New Zealand over the long term. What's
your favourite tool that you actually use?
Unoriginal, but ChatGPT. I don't just use it as search and research. It's very much a thought partner and an editor, and helps me break through writer's block and stuff like that.
Yeah, awesome. Do you use the audio feature or only?
No, only written.
Yeah. I assume so. What's one meeting that you'd cut tomorrow?
I'd flip it the other way and cut almost all of them. People were always surprised when they'd look at my calendar as a CEO and they'd see a whole lot of spare space.
That's cool. I mean, we've had a lot of interesting social media feedback recently over like something that David from A16Z said, in that he would cut all one-on-ones because he just doesn't see the value in them and believes people should have natural conversations.
Yeah, I don't entirely agree with that. I mean, one-on-ones were actually key meetings for me, but I had a rhythm of getting a weekly update, giving feedback. That would set the agenda for the exec meeting, and then it would also set the agenda and enable me to focus one-on-ones on tricky issues.
Yeah. Awesome.
But then I always had tons of space to kind of bring together the ad hoc stuff.
When you're thinking about a product, do you ship fast or do you wait for perfect?
Bias to speed, and that's mainly because the team will always want to polish more, and so as the leader, I have to push them to go faster.
Yeah. Remote, hybrid, or office for speed?
Office with extreme flexibility to enable people to work it with their life.
What's extreme flexibility mean?
Don't talk to me if you've got a doctor's appointment or the power guy needs to come over or whatever. Just do it. Kids events, just work that around your responsibilities.
What's the first thing you hire when stepping from founder-led to leadership?
That'll be different for every business, but I think you just need to hire someone who's super smart, systems thinker, gets things done. Like that. Talent density is super important, and you start early on that.
Mm. And what's a common founder myth you'd bust?
Common founder myth, best product always wins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
nice.
It always takes more than that.
Yeah, nice. And last question, what's a lesson that you had to learn the hard way?
Ask for help.
Awesome. Hey, Alex, this has been an absolute joy, mate. It's great to finally get you onto the podcast. I think I've been asking you for 2 years to come on the podcast. And so finally that you've got a bit of space and time. Thank you. Well, Alex is gone now, and this is the moment where we reflect on the podcast briefly. And so if I'm thinking about this episode, what I'm thinking about is there is so many amazing people in this industry and this ecosystem. There's so many people out there who are just doing the work, doing the mahi, and they don't promote themselves. And this is the joy that we get to have on this podcast, is that we get to sit across someone for an hour and a half or an hour and just soak up in the wisdom of these remarkable people. And Alex is one of these guys where he's been just doing phenomenal work with some of these companies for so many years now and hasn't been promoting himself. And so a lot of people won't have the fortunate luxury like I do to grab a coffee with him occasionally and catch up and, whenever he's in Wellington or call him up and ask him for a question. And so I'm pleased that you got to share in that with me today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're sitting here on YouTube right now, ready to watch the next one, I think you should go to this podcast here. This is one of my favorites. And before you do that, make sure you subscribe over here.